morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Felicita from the Department of Physiology. Today we have with us Dr. Kumar, who basically runs an auditory lab at the Department of Physiology. His research interests lie in the area of control of auditory efferents, detection of auditory signals and background noise, and tinnitus. He currently studies how the human ear and brain process sound signals and uses this understanding to develop a novel and inexpensive method for hearing screening. In this talk, he will be discussing how to predict hearing risk based on earphone sound exposure levels and the steps that can be taken to limit the risk, which includes taking a screening test. This topic is very much relevant today, considering the exponential increase in the use of hearing devices for teaching and learning, and even professional work settings over the course of the pandemic. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Kumar to share his work with us.
Thank you very much, Feli. And I'll start sharing my screen first. Thank you. And since our topic is about earphone listening, I'll start by introducing the different types of earphones that's available in the market today. So you have some earphones which go on the ear, or some larger earpiece, which goes around the ear. And the other type is the in the ear or insert types, which go right into your ear canal. And also the last type you have is the earbuds or intraconchal, which is similar to in the ear, but they're more loosely fit outside the ear canal. And all these earphones, with the new technology, they can produce high quality digital music. Yeah. And one of the reasons is because they have a very sensitive diaphragm, and they work by vibration of this diaphragm. When there's change in the voltage, they vibrate, and then they cause subsequent changes in sound pressure around the column of the air adjacent to it. And this causes the sound to travel through air into your ear canal and subsequently into the inner ear. Of course, there are also bone conductors nowadays. This type of headphones are placed right on your skull, the mastoid process. So the vibration is through the bone, and it goes directly into the inner ear, because the inner ear is encased within the temporal bone. So you can send the vibration directly into the cochlea. So with the background of different types of earphones, I will start my talk by addressing the question of whether these earphones can lead to hearing damage, after which I will talk about how the damage can occur and the steps that we can take to limit the hearing damage. So when we talk about hearing damage, we are actually talking about noise induced, because you're relating it to the sound exposure. And there are two main factors involved here: the volume of the exposure as well as the duration of the exposure. Typically, the noise-induced hearing damage is historically an occupational problem, where factory workers, for example, are exposed to high level of noise during 8-hour working day. So the limit that we have, a safety limit, is all based on occupational safety limits. And the recommended limit is 85 decibels for 8 hours a day. And this is based on a typical working day. But if you look at the graph here at the bottom, for example, if you have an iPod at a maximum volume, it can go way above 85. So you're going to go up to 115, which is equivalent to roughly about noise coming from chainsaw and jackhammers. So obviously, the answer to the question that I pose is definitely there's a risk, because they definitely exceed the safety level. But it depends also on the duration of listening. So WHO has recently come up with some recommendation. This is based on both the listening volume, and listening volume is measured in decibels unit, and the safe listening duration in a week. So for those children below 12, the limit would be 75 dB. And if you're above 12, it's 80 dB. And this is corresponds to safety duration of 40 hours in a week. Yeah, the reason why these levels are lower than 85 in the occupational setting is because there's a difference between the music exposure that comes from earphone that's placed close to your eardrum compared to free field exposure that comes in the patient or subjects are exposed in a factory setting, for example. And then on top of that, so the reason why they take into account of 40 hours a week is because they convert the 8 hours working day times 5 days, so it becomes 40 hours a week. And there's also an exchange ratio. So if you go 3 dB above this safety limit, every time you increase the volume of 3 dB, it halves the safe listening duration. So for example, from 80 to 83, then the safe listening duration will become 20 hours a week. In the media, you often find a recommendation of 60% of volume setting in your devices for 60 minutes a day. So if you take 60 minutes a day, that will be equivalent to about 7 hours a week. And this falls within this range. So the volume between about 80 to 90 dB. So to check whether this would be an accurate recommendation, I've measured sound level that comes out from 12 different Android phones of various brands and which are coupled to their stock earphones. And I've played a standard music. And you can see from this graph, so the x-axis here is the volume setting, percentage from the maximum volume, and output here is in dB. So firstly, there's an increase, almost a linear increase in the output level with the increase in volume setting. And there's a substantial variation from one brand to another brand. And this is due to the audio chipset as well as the sensitivity of the individual earphones. So if you take 60% of the recommended volume, you see the corresponding output falls as per what is suggested. So in the earlier slide, 80 to about 90 dB. So my initial work started more than 10 years ago. These were done in teenagers, high school students around Klang Valley. So what we did was we went to the school and we measured the listening level as well as the listening duration and estimated the hearing risk. Why teenagers? Because this is the high risk group. Okay? So you can see in data of 177 high school students on the right side, the distribution of their exposure is close to a normal distribution. And using a equation here, we can take their listening level and the average listening duration and calculate the exposure, compare it to the exposure in occupational setting. So based on the recommendation of WHO now, at 80 dB, roughly about 5% of the teenagers were at risk of hearing loss. Yeah? But remember, this data is collected more than 10 years ago. So the current data is showing, this is based on studies around the world, about 50% of the listeners are aged between 15 to 35 at risk, which means if I do the same research today, I would expect this curve to shift to the right, where the peak actually falls around 80 dB. There are many reasons for this. Two main reasons would be, one, the devices they use now is different. So the teenagers today, they use smartphones rather than MP3 players, which were predominant 10 years ago. And so also because of the pandemic and so on, we would expect the higher duration of exposure. So this data is taken from other countries, and this compares the exposure from earphone listening versus exposure from other sources of noise, recreational noise. So earphone listening, you can see here, the average is about 76, that's close to 80 that I've mentioned earlier. But there's a large range. Yeah. And what we were interested is in the portion of subjects that listen to the higher level, almost close to the other exposure, which is deemed high risk. And turned out to be one of the main factors why listeners increase their volume is related to the environmental sound. So if you are listening into in an area where you have a very noisy environment, for example, in the street or while traveling in a train, what happens is this noise from environment, ambient noise, tend to mask your music through the earphones. And therefore, users tend to increase the volume to overcome the masking. And that is one of the main reasons why they tend to expose themselves to higher level of noise. This comes to the next uh, topic where I would like to introduce the new technology that people use now, which is called noise cancellation. So in this type of earphones, you have microphones that monitor the ambient noise, and these headphones actually produce anti-phase noise to counter the noise that comes from the environment. You can do this because remember I told you noise travels through air. So this is based on air pressure. So all you have to do is do an anti-phase pressure, and they will cancel each other, so you will not hear the noise. And so there are different types of active noise cancellation headphones in the market. One of the earliest one and the best one available is the Bose headphone. So this is a graph. Don't worry about other lines here. Just concentrate on this dotted line, Bose. ANC stands for active noise cancellation. So I've actually measured the amount of noise attenuation at various frequencies. And you will see that the turning on an active noise cancellation circuit on a Bose headphone actually improves the attenuation frequencies below 1 kilohertz. And this is where it's important because most of environment sound, especially the traffic noise or in a train and so on, are actually low frequency noise. So active noise cancellation headphones works well when you're actually wearing it in outdoor and noisy place to reduce the masking. So the first answer to the first question, yes, it can cause hearing damage, but it will depend on your listening habits, both on the listening volume as well as duration. So next, I will briefly describe how the hearing damage can take place. So as I told you, the sound pressure waves travel to air. So it's conducted through the ear canal, reaches the eardrum. From there, it goes to the middle ear before reaching the coil structure known as cochlea inside the inner ear. Within this cochlea, you have sensory hair cells, which transduce the sound into electrical signals, which are then passed into your brain. There are two types of sensory hair cells, the inner hair cells and the outer hair cells. Excessive sound exposure can lead to irreversible damage of both these hair cells. So the outer hair cells are more sensitive. They participate in amplifying the sound. And the inner hair cells, they are the primary transducers. They convert the sound into electrical signal in the nerve, the auditory nerve fibers, or ANF here. So the damage can be either seen at the structure, especially the stereocilia, the apical part of the hair cell, on the outer hair cell, and also degeneration of the primary afferent dendrites due to a condition known as synaptopathy, due to excessive release of a neurotransmitter known as glutamate, which then causes a degeneration of the synapse. So just to summarize the potential issue with earphone listening and how hearing damage happens. So firstly, one characteristic that you need to remember is it's irreversible. So it's because the sensory cells that are damaged do not regenerate, and there's currently no treatment available. Second, the damage happens very gradually. It's cumulative over years of exposure. It's silent, especially during the initial stages, because one, it takes some amount of time before you see a shift in your hearing sensitivity with the loss of the hair cells, because there are thousands of them in each cochlea. Two, the damage happens at higher frequencies, which are not related to speech frequency in the beginning. So you don't actually have any issues with day-to-day listening until it becomes more advanced. Finally, the impact is also to accelerate aging of the cochlea. This is related to loss of hearing sensitivity at the high frequencies. So let me just introduce to you how a hearing test is done. So if you have a hearing problem and you attend an ENT clinic, they refer you to an audiologist will perform a hearing test inside a sound booth. So what you have to do is actually listen to various sounds of different frequencies, and you press a button, and they will track the lowest level or the threshold that you can hear. So this is plotted in a graph known as an audiogram. So each point here represents a lowest level that you can hear at the various frequencies. So if you take the noise-induced hearing loss, the impact is usually at a high frequency, and aging also impacts at the same range of frequencies, so they can superimpose, and that's the reason why noise-induced or injury or not sound exposure at a young age will accelerate your aging effect. This graph here shows the aging effect in both female and male. You can see males generally have worse hearing, and the deterioration takes place usually after 30 years old. And they gradually become worse, and it starts at a higher frequency, and gradually it will impact frequencies of speech closer to 1 kilohertz. So what we expect to find in those teenagers who are exposing themselves at a younger age is an earlier onset of aging. So instead of 30, they probably will have deterioration even at 20. And by the time they're at 70, you have worse hearing than what's plotted here. So the second answer to the second question, how does the hearing damage occur? It causes permanent damage of your sensory cells, and it accelerates aging effect. Finally, I'll discuss about how we can practice safe listening habits. So you can, as recommended, I think 60% volume setting for 60 minutes a day is appropriate. You can take breaks in between listening, and nowadays all devices come with some volume limiters, so you can use them. I encourage your children to use them. You use appropriate earphones, for example, the noise cancelling earphones, or you can even use the insert earphones. Insert earphones, while they are closer to the eardrum, but they also block the ear canal from the ambient noise. So if you don't have a noise cancelling earphone, you can also use an insert earphone if you are listening in a noisy environment. Get a hearing test if you're worried about hearing loss or experience a ringing sensation like tinnitus. And at the community level, I think there should be more emphasis on hearing health education at the school level, as well as proper public health policy. We don't have one for recreational noise exposure. And the last two slides, I'll just briefly explain my present work. So I'm involved in coming up with a low-cost computer-based screening test for hearing. And one particular condition that I'm interested in is the hidden hearing loss. These are conditions where primarily affects young people, especially those who are using excessive earphone usage, where when you do a normal hearing test, there's no change in hearing loss or hearing sensitivity. But I'm using a different method, using to track the cochlear frequency resolution to measure the early impact of hearing earphone usage in young adults. The second research that I'm also interested in is the development of a mobile app, which can monitor the usage of your, or rather the exposure to sound, calculating sound dose and plotting graphs, which will track the listening duration in a week. These type of apps can also be used as an educational tool, provide cues for modifying listening habits of these users. And with this data, you can also predict the effects of their hearing in the future. Okay, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kumar. Well, if the audience have any questions, you can put it up in the Q&A box. But I have one, Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, sure.
You showed a few different types of earphones, but now we also have a lot of these wireless headphones and wireless earbuds, like the one that I'm using right now. Have you looked at any differences in terms of like the sound levels of these type of wireless earbuds and whether there is an increased risk of hearing damage with these types?
Yeah, sure. Actually, the wireless technology will not change the sensitivity of the earphone. So based on the volume setting of your device, the output will be still the same, whether it's wireless or wired. Yeah, so it won't make any difference.
All right, so we do have a few questions. I think one of them is kind of curious to know if listening to music or radio in the car, how does that compare to like listening to music to earphones in terms of the sound levels?
Yeah, sure. So when you're listening to a stereo music, it's actually coming from ambient level. So it's outside the ear, yeah, rather than directly inside. If it's a earphone, the level is actually measured closer to the eardrum, whereas in the stereo, it's free feel. We use this term free feel. So it's similar to what happens in, let's say, in a factory, with a worker in a factory, a free feel noise. The difference is if you measure the noise level outside the ear, and compare the same noise, and if you put a sensitive microphone into the ear canal and measure it, the level inside will be slightly higher. And this amplification is dependent on the frequency of sound, and this is related to the shape of our ear as well as the ear canal, which has a resonance and amplifies the signal. So in one sense, you can say if you are using an equivalent volume with your stereo setting and the earphone, I would say the stereo exposure is a higher risk, because they will further amplify the noise when it reaches your eardrum.
Okay, so in conclusion, you would say that if the sound levels of listening to the music in the car is similar to that of the earphones still have a higher risk of hearing damage.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, the other way around. The stereo has a higher
risk
because the ear actually amplifies the noise, like a sound level comes from outside. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thanks for that. We have a few questions. Is there a particular brand of earphones that you would recommend that seems to be, effective in reducing hearing damage?
No, I don't think so. There's any specific brands, but I will suggest earphone type according to how and when you listen. So if you are a listener, an outdoor listener, as I mentioned, when you're traveling on a road, when it's busy street, or inside a train, a subway, or something like that, then I would recommend you to get a noise cancellation headphone, which will reduce the masking effect. Or if you don't want to, because generally the noise cancellation headphones are a little bit more expensive. So if you want a cheaper option, you can go for the insert types. As I mentioned earlier, the insert earphones, while they are closer to the eardrum, they also block because they block your ear canal. And some of them come with a special ear tip, the foam ear tip, which is better in insulating. So they provide passive insulation of noise, and they are good if you are using it in a noisy environment. Yeah.
Sorry, so related to that,
discourage. There's also these bone conductors that you see nowadays. They're much more expensive. The benefit of using bone conductors is because your ear is free, so you can hear conversations and so on while listening to music. But the disadvantage of bone conductors is your ear is exposed to the masking noise. So you tend to increase the volume to overcome the masking.
Okay. So related to that, I've seen some earbuds with passive noise cancelling versus active noise cancelling. Is there any difference between the two?
Yeah, as I just described to you, active noise cancellation means there's a circuitry inside the earphone which monitors the noise and produces the anti-phase noise to cancel the noise. The passive noise insulation, like what I mentioned, the foam type, so they passively block the noise. There's no active cancellation.
Okay.
So the active noise cancellation works best at the lower frequencies, and they're usually generally more expensive. Depending on the brands, you have the cheaper ones that may not be as good as the more expensive ones. So the better the quality of the active noise cancellation, then you have more attenuation of the lower frequency noise.
Okay, we do have a very interesting, quite scientific question. The conduction of sound through the ear. This is from Chan Yu Quinn. The conduction of sound through the ear is a high energy process. Is hearing loss a possible reflection of those with vulnerability to mitochondrial disease? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mitochondrial disease. Okay. Ear is definitely a very sensitive organ. It's cochlea is probably one of the most sensitive organ to hypoxia, because of remember the hair cells in a cochlea. As you correctly pointed out, right? They are actually actively functioning and responding to the sound vibration, and they're transducing the signal. And they definitely use. There's a lot of mitochondria in those cells, and your question probably is right, but I'm not sure whether anyone has actually looked into it.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the last two questions, and maybe three, would be something more practical. Does health insurance cover hearing aid? Yeah. Any comments
I'm
from
not
patients?
an expert in that area. You probably need an audiologist or ENT person to talk about it. But definitely in overseas, they cover. I'm not quite sure what happens in Malaysia. I don't know. Maybe someone else in the audience, or Prof. Victor, who's probably from public health, can answer that.
Hi, good morning. Basically, I have a question also, but I can try to answer that. For COCHLEAR is covered. It means COCHLEAR insurance under occupational disease. But I don't know about your personal insurance. It's based on what you got to read your policy. So everything is in the policy. So you got to talk to your insurance agent. But for COCHLEAR is covered if it's occupational induced hearing loss. And can I ask a question?
Yes, Prof.
Yes.
All right. Just because we do run a lot, correct? So sometimes we use insert earphone, as you mentioned, insert earphone. But how does the vibration actually from the running and then that cause is it better to what harm does it cause? Because the insert earphone, basically you're creating a vacuum inside your eardrum, and then the vibration from the running actually, what is the effect of it? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. The vibration that's caused by running or other type of physical movement is actually very, very low frequency. So your hearing is sensitive between 20 to about 20,000 hertz, but anything below 250 hertz would be hardly heard by the ear. So I would not expect any damage from direct physical vibration onto the ear. Probably the only problem you have is you need a headphone which is tightly fit into your ear, so it doesn't come up while you're running. Other than that, I don't think so. Direct physical vibration will cause anything to the cochlea.
Okay, I think we have time for just one last question. It is sort of very specifically related to the app that you are working on. And if the app, or how does the app store big data that has been collected for retrospective analysis? This comes from Dr. Krishna.
Yeah. So one of my idea was if we have a lot of data from users, right, and they continuously give us on the pattern of listening. So we need to know the sound level, volume setting they're using, as well as the duration of listening. Then based on this, we can predict the exposure level. And then from there, you remember I showed a graph on aging effect. We can predict what sort of age is expected in their cochlea. So they may be 30-year-old, but we can say if you listen to this exposure level, we can predict and say that your cochlea in 5 years or 10 years time will reach age of 40 or 50. So that's a prediction that we can do, I think, using some mathematical calculation.
All right. If you don't mind, last one, Dr. Kumar, because you were talking about that graph, and I noticed that there was a difference between the genders in terms of the effects of aging on hearing loss. Is there any specific reason for this difference?
But traditionally, people think it's because of occupational reasons. So male tend to be exposed, to settings where there are louder noise around them. But nowadays, I think people see less and less differences between gender, because I think it's more of an occupational thing.
Okay, so that would be all.
Can I ask one last question, Dr. Kumar?
Yeah.
You use exchange rate of 3 dB instead of 5 dB. What is the main reason?
This is just a recommendation from WHO.
So is it because it is how our ear actually function, how the actually noise actually doubles or thing?
No. This 5 dB and 3 dB exchange ratio actually is calculated based on the data that were obtained in 1960s from occupational side. So you have this especially from North America. They monitored miners and factory workers over a period of years, and then they come up with a prediction where if you increase within this 3 dB or 5 dB, you will have this amount of threshold shift, whether 5 dB or 10 dB threshold shift after about 10 years. And that's how it started off. So initially, everybody thinks 5 dB exchange ratio is enough. And now a lot of the countries have revised it and made it into 3 dB to make it more conservative. And they feel that the 5 dB exchange ratio probably does not predict well the shift in the threshold over a period of time. And I know Malaysia, I think, is still using 5 dB, is it?
No, basically we have reduced to 3 dB already.
Okay. So in the occupational setting, you have changed it to 3 dB, but definitely when we talk about recreational setting, WHO recommends 3 dB exchange ratio.
Yeah. So, right. Thank you for the explanation.
So thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, and for all the questions from the audience. I can confidently say that our understanding of use of hearing devices and hearing risk of hearing damage is improved, and we'll be so mindful of our use from now on. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.